It's my
Then
sponsored segment.
it's your sponsored segment. The Pete sponsored segment. NBA trade machine. Trades that could or could not work. I'll let you.
So,
I'll let you lead it.
all right, this is what I want us to do. Okay, I'm gonna name a player. Okay,
Okay.
now, I want us to discuss how realistic a trade is for the person. One, this is step one of my little segment here. Discuss the realism of them actually being traded. Two, I want you on the trade machine there to,
Okay.
if we decide to go to the next step and say this is a realistic person that might be traded, let's then start looking for a realistic trade. Not forever for each of these guys. I only have a
Yeah.
few. Um, but then we have a little bit of a discussion for each of these people. We could try and figure out what teams actually make sense for them to go
Mm-hmm.
to and discuss even if we think they're going to get traded. Because I might name people that you disagree with in terms of whether they're
Shooters.
going to get traded, where they should get traded.
Okay.
Um, let's read Sean's comment real quick. The tourney should just be built into the regular season. The tourney games should definitely count for your record. I agree with you, but that's something they're going to have to figure out. I think that little disorganized mess of that format is a lot. All right, Bernie, here we go. I'm gonna start low,
Okay.
just role players and kind of work my way up. There are guys I would like to see traded. I think they're pretty realistic too. Number one,
Jalen Brunson.
Terence Ross,
Terrence
Orlando
Ross.
Magic.
Okay. Let me.
Terence Ross is a player I've never truly understood why is still on Orlando. Terence Ross, he's got to be like a top tier, fun to watch, but just you never see him player.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's right up in that category. But he's a guy that there's so many guards on Orlando. There's too much youth there. They don't need Terrence Ross. What do you think about him being traded? I think we've heard him in trade rumors for probably 5 straight years now, but I think this is the year it finally happens. What do you think?
I think that potentially could be a good trade person, like in terms of, again, thinking about people that don't fit the timeline, thinking about people that, do they fit in the plans of what the Orlando Magic are trying to do, right? We think
Mm-hmm.
about who they have right now. They have Bol Bol, they have Mo Bamba, Boncaro, they have Gary Harris, they have Wendell Carter Jr., Markel Fultz, Jonathan Isaac, Franz Wagner, who's again one of their key guys, Cole Anthony. I mean, they are
Mm-hmm.
riddled with guards, and the
Too
fact
many
that,
guards.
and they just signed Joel Ayayi today to their
Yep.
team. So again, you're adding a lot of guards to this roster, and so eventually someone has to be the odd man out, and I think Terrence Ross might have to be that guy because he potentially could be a guy that looks to move on, and to maybe a contender team. Maybe a contender looks to get him.
Yeah, that's here's my team I'll pose for Terrence Ross. Team I was interested. I think they could use some more guard help, some scoring off the bench. What do you think about the Dallas Mavericks for Terrence Ross?
Dallas Mavericks.
They have some pretty tradable contracts on their squad. I mean, his contract is insanely tradable nowadays, 11.5
Mm-hmm.
expiring. There's a lot of people that would line up. Whether you even have to give up players to even get that guy on that contract, I'm not sure. But looking at Dallas, they have a lot of like these lower end guys making like $2-3 million that I could see just not being worth much to them. I think a guy like Terrence Ross would be pretty valuable to them, especially losing Brunson, some guard depth, some
Mm-hmm.
scoring off the bench when Luka's not around. And just considering how often injured Tim Hardaway Jr. seems to be in recent years, too, I think that's something to consider for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, what would be a realistic trade here? I mean, you have Terrence Ross as kind of one of the guys.
Terrence
Who
Ross.
do you give away for the Mavericks at this point?
See, the problem is, I think your gut instinct would say somebody like Reggie Bullock would be the first person you'd look at, right?
Yeah,
But I think just threw my microphone. I'm
that's
sorry
good.
to everybody who just got their ears punished by that. Excuse me. Um, I honestly think if anybody I would like to see get traded off of Dallas, and maybe there's Dallas fans that would disagree with me. I think Maxi Kleber was so bad in the playoffs, in certain stretches, like just could not be out on the court. And I think their contracts match up pretty well. I think what is he like 9 mil, something like that? Might even
Uh,
be an
not
expiring too.
9 mil, but according to the trade, just straight up would fail.
That would fail. What's the fail? Is Dallas over the cap already? They probably are.
Yeah,
They probably have to give up something
I'm gonna
else.
so cut 150,000 from the Mavericks incoming trades to be successful. So the Mavericks need to trade probably just one more
It-
person. So you'd probably want to
yeah,
get
just something cheap.
maybe
Nit Lakina, just throw him on there, or Theo Pinson. Why not him? Somebody like that. I think that's pretty realistic. Like Maxi Kleber's not bad depth in terms of getting somebody. Like there's a lot of teams that would use him, whether Orlando wants to keep him or not. Dallas, I'm just throwing them out there. Somewhere realistic, somebody that could use some guard depth, a guy that's a vet, doesn't need a ton of minutes, and can give you 10, 15 off the bench pretty easily. I think that'd be a nice fit for everybody involved.
yeah. So Terrence Ross for Kaliba and Nitlakina would work in
There
this
you go.
sense.
Send them.
But according to the analysis, you would not affect the winning percentage of each team.
There you go. See, I wouldn't actually necessarily do Nitwakina. I think he gives them a lot of good defense off the bench too. Even though Frankie Smokes has his issues, he can't score to save his life. But it's something. It's something.
Yeah.
That's just our beginner. Let's move on to somebody maybe a little bit bigger. Somebody else we could talk about.
All right, who you think?
In this one, I already have another team in mind for this guy. I think I might maybe have even seen some rumblings of this, but not a ton, not all over the place. I wouldn't even have suggested it if it was all over the place. What about Eric Gordon? Your Boston Celtics, Bernie.
Eric Gordon. What team is Eric Gordon on this? Is the
Plays for the
Houston
Houston
still in the
Rockets.
Rockets?
Still on the Rockets.
So Eric Gordon, okay, to the Celtics. Okay, so who are we giving up if we're the Celtics?
That's kind of why I wanted to bring this one to you. I think first of all, would you even be interested in adding somebody like Eric Gordon to your team? I would say he shot above 43% or about 43% on catch and shoot threes last season. Just as like a shooter, you don't get much better in terms of just a role playing shooting guard who can get his own shot, get open. He doesn't demand a lot from the rest of the people around him. Um, the one thing I would argue is really tough with this trade for the Celtics. You guys actually somehow have a lot of guards. I don't think of your team as having a ton of guards because none of them are superstars or even really stars. Sorry, Marcus
Yeah,
Smart, I love you, but you're not really necessarily a star.
yeah.
But they're all super above solid. Like they're not necessarily people you would bench for Eric Gordon. So I think the question would be, would you prefer somebody like Eric Gordon to Derek White? And I would say you probably would rather have Derek White for his defense, right?
I mean, I'd rather have Derek White because I think in last year's kind of finals and what he
Mhm.
showed in the Eastern Conference Finals, he showed that he can be a big time gamer. I think with Eric Gordon, I think he's a good player, but I think after playing so many years on a team that didn't prioritize winning the way
Sure.
that the Celtics have, I think Eric Gordon probably suits this Rockets team a little bit more because they need that veteran leadership on this squad with so many young players. We think of guys like Kenny Martin Jr., we think of Josh Christopher, Garuba, Kevin Porter Jr., Fernando, uh, Jalen Green, Jabari Smith. I mean, all those guys need a veteran leader on this team. And I just feel like Eric Gordon fits that role for the Rockets. So I think the Celtics are actually fine where they're at right now, just because I
Hmm.
feel like they have the pieces that I like and could see working out. It's the Eric Gordon one where I think they just need to let him be the leader of the Houston Rockets. So I would probably say no to Eric Gordon moving over to the Celtics.
All right. Well, let me give you another option for old Eric Gordon. I came prepared for this because
Oh, he came prepared. Came with
came
that.
prepared for this because I looked at this and I was thinking like I like the idea of him on the Celtics, but I wasn't necessarily taking into account the Brogdon signing. I think if you didn't have Brogdon, it would be a different story. I think you probably
Yeah.
could really use him,
Hmm.
especially with a lot of the ball handling issues that the
Yeah.
Celtics were running into in the playoffs. I think that's something to be considered. But here's another team. I actually would think be a great fit for him. What do you think about Eric Gordon coming off the bench for the Phoenix Suns? I know we just talked about them, but I think this makes a lot of sense for everybody involved. Um,
Okay.
here's the depth of guards or of shooting guards, twos behind old Devin Booker. All right, Their second shooting guard off the bench is Landry Shamet, and then third is Damian Lee, and then they have Josh Okogie as fourth. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Gordon is better than Landry Shamet, certainly. I don't know if there's any universe in which Landry Shamet is better than Eric Gordon. And I think, after seeing Landry Shamet on just about every other team in the NBA in the last few years, I feel like he's been traded all over the place. It's funny I say this because Landry Shamet is almost like new age, new gen Eric Gordon, where I feel like every time I look, he's on a different team. But the thing with Landry Shamet is that he really loses the one thing he's great at, which is 3-point shooting in the playoffs. Like Landry Shamet is not really known for his clutch buckets. That's not necessarily his thing. So I would like to see this team go get some more shooting, some more consistent scoring, because we saw what happened to them in Dallas. It wasn't in Dallas, it was in Phoenix, but we saw what happened to them against Dallas in terms of what happens when your top two guys don't have it. What happens when Devin Booker isn't making shots? What happens when Chris Paul isn't making shots? What happens when Chris Paul's hurt? Because then you have Cameron Payne is your next line of defense, right? I like this move in terms of getting Eric Gordon, just in the versatility of replacing Chris Paul and Devin Booker just under any bad circumstances. He's a great fit between those guys, and just he can slot in either of their spots when the other one's sitting down. So I like this trade. I did not do any trade machine to see if this would work in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so we have Eric Gordon. You're trading Shamit. Who else are you getting rid of? Because you're going to need to match it. You're going to need probably another $10 million to get this
Yeah,
going.
dude. The tough thing is it would have to probably be between. It would probably be Saric or Jay Crowder.
Who are you getting rid of? Who's going?
God, that's really tough. I might make people mad here. I would probably get rid of Jay Crowder over Dario Saric. And I know that's something to be said about we've seen Jay Crowder work in playoff moments, make it far, be a great defender, but he's getting older. I really like what I've seen from Dario Saric when he's healthy. He was just hurt all of last season. I don't know. That's a tough one.
Well,
I don't know. Do you have a better answer than me?
I think Jay Crowder works. I mean, I think again for me, Jay Crowder continues to not show up in the playoffs. That's kind
That's
of
what
been
I mean.
that's kind
That's
of
how
been
I feel.
that's been his mo for the last couple of years now. I mean, the Miami Heat team against the Lakers, he was a no show, and then this past year with the Phoenix Suns, no show. Like
Look,
he made.
Houston gets better in that trade. It's a
Well,
win-win for everybody.
I mean, my thing is too is like with Drake Crowder made so much noise in last year's playoffs, not last year's, but the year before when he beat, or actually no, it was last year when they beat the Lakers or whenever they beat the Lakers in the playoffs.
It's 2 years ago, yeah.
He was bumping his chest, celebrating, saying, take that to the king and other things like that. I don't know. I'm in the belief that you trade away Jay Crowder, you trade away Shamit, get Eric Gordon. I think that's probably a better trade. And like you said, it adds the depth that they need in the backcourt for a guy that, has 2 years left on his contract, 19 mil. You're getting rid of two guys there for Jay Crowder and Shamit, who again, good players in the regular season, just hasn't shown it in the playoffs. And, I would love to see Eric Gordon in the playoffs again to kind of see if he can be that guy or, if he won't be.
Well, I would just say think of their shooting if they had the three of them out on the court too, just Booker, Paul, and Gordon. I mean, that's a small lineup. You're not getting a lot of defense from that, but just offensively, he's a solid option. People haven't seen Eric Gordon play since James Harden left this team, really. But he's still the same guy. Whether you like him, you love him, you hate him, whatever. He's a solid guard off the bench. He's a great six man in terms of getting you points and getting you buckets. And like you said, he's solid veteran leadership too. He's not necessarily somebody you hear anything bad about or, starts any fuss with his teammates. So it's a type of guy that I think the Phoenix Suns could use. And realistically, I think of that team and I think of that 50-point blowout. And I think of just seeing dudes take open shots and miss open shots.
Yeah.
So if I'm them, I look at Landry Shamet, I look at guys like Jay Crowder, and I think I need more consistent scoring than what you guys give me in big moments. And I think Eric Gordon can give you that. You've seen him score major buckets in big games at different stretches of his career. So I'm glad I convinced you of one a little bit.
Yeah. All right, let's do
All
a
right.
demo.
Next player. This guy is another level above Eric Gordon. Okay.
Oh, rising up.
It's not he's not a superstar, but he's somebody I think should be dealt from the team he's on. And this is one I come very ill prepared in terms of what team he should go to. But I think there's teams that would take him, and that's Rashawn Holmes from Sacramento. I like Rashawn Holmes a lot.
Holmes.
He
Okay.
is certainly not going to get a lot of minutes on Sacramento with some of their, recent acquisitions. I mean, he'll still get minutes for Sacramento. But the problem is I think Rashawn Holmes is better than that. I don't necessarily think he's a world beater or anything, but I think there's people who could use Rashawn Holmes. I would have
Mhm.
said Philly before they got Montrez. I would
Yeah.
have said he would have been a great pickup for them. He has a little bit of shooting. He's just super consistent. That's the thing with Rashawn Holmes that I've always liked. And he's on a great contract too.
Yeah.
So, do you think it's realistic that he gets traded, first of all?
I think it could be done. I think it depends on what you're looking for. I think if I am, one of these, I think a team that comes to mind for me would be a team like the Brooklyn Nets, since they're deciding to keep
Sure.
those two guys. They should try to go for him. Lakers should definitely try to go for him as kind of like that rebounding big. Especially to pair up with Anthony Davis, I think that'd be a great actual little addition to the Lakers that could make them really good this year in terms of adding that value on defense and also rebounding, which again any team needs. Um, I think Brooklyn would probably benefit from getting Holmes the most, in my opinion, because they definitely are a team that's,
Yeah.
especially after last year, you saw, especially when Kevin Durant and Kyrie were missing shots, the ball the majority of the time ended up in the opposing team's hands. And
Yeah, it did.
even though that's the way it's supposed to be in basketball, there was no one there on the Brooklyn Nets where I was like, okay, this guy could go get an offensive rebound and help out and get you guys an extra 2 points that a possession normally would end in a transition bucket for the other team. So I'm curious to look at Brooklyn. Is there a team that you think of when it comes to Holmes?
You know, a team I would love to see him on, and it's not super realistic in terms of like he wouldn't necessarily go there and be a starter, so it kind of goes against what I just said with him. Even though I think there's a universe in which he is the starter in like a year or so, it's Milwaukee. Because I
Milwaukee was a
look at
good
that
team. Good
team,
shout.
I look at that team, and I think of the stretch they had without what's his name, big boy, Brooke Lopez,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that was in the regular season, so it didn't really matter very much. But say that was in the playoffs, right? And we saw them lose because they didn't have Chris Middleton. That's a different discussion altogether. But say they had gotten to the playoffs without Brooke Lopez, I think we would have
Mm-hmm.
seen something pretty similar because their center depth is really pathetic in Milwaukee. And they kind of get away with it because you have a guy like Giannis who can do anything. He can play center, he can play power forward, he can literally play every position. And they kind of have the B level of that, or maybe even the C level in Bobby Portis, right? I think he's actually listed on the team as a center. He's
Mm-hmm.
their second, I think, in their depth chart at center. But he's not like to me. I don't think Bobby Portis. I think center is not. Those two things don't go hand in hand for me. I don't
Yeah.
think that's his true position. So I would argue like just having somebody like Rashawn Holmes as maybe the bulk of your center play, and then Brooke Lopez as your specialist. Because Brooke Lopez is almost mid 30s. I think he's 34. So there's a universe in which the wheels start to come off on Brooke Lopez soon. And if I'm Milwaukee, I want to look at reasonable price centers, somebody not necessarily going to stretch the floor like Brooke does, but just give you something, some versatility, some length. And the thing with Rashawn Holmes, I think that goes understated. It's not reflected in his stats. Is he's very athletic. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
super versatile. Like how long
Exactly.
and just how fast he is down the court. So
Uh-huh.
I would like to see him on Milwaukee. I think that'd be a fun trade for everybody involved because I think Milwaukee could get like, or not Milwaukee, but Sacramento. I don't know what they would get in return. Probably like Grayson Allen would probably have to be part of it.
I
I
mean,
think
you
his
could.
contract makes
You,
sense.
you could do a straight swap for Brooke Lopez. Brooke Lopez for Holmes and kind of migrate and
Start
move
moving
on.
a little younger.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something, but I also think that's a little risky because I really love the 3-point shooting you get from Brook. I think that is
Yeah.
important to the team. So that would work. I mean, if you're playing it safe and just want to move off of his contract, he's an expiring, I believe, this
Hmm.
year, Brook. That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at the Sacramento Kings right now. It'd be a tough way to get Holmes for the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah. It
I
would
just
not it would not be easy going. It wouldn't be. It's not the Brooklyn doesn't have a lot of room to do anything, to be
yeah.
totally honest with you. They
Let's,
don't. But he would be a great fit on their team.
yeah. Trying to see if the Lakers would have a fit. Probably could.
I'll check that out. Let's check that out because I think he'd be an awesome fit on their team. I mean, you have a guy who's a center that doesn't want to play center, so
Yeah. Otherwise, you kind of rely on Thomas Bryant being like the main guy.
yeah, that's not good. It's not good.
Man, they have a lot of guys on their roster, and I think it's all contracts that still need to be paid or something. Um, okay, you get rid of Kendrick Nunn because he has yet to play a game.
He still might not be healthy too, based on some reports that are out there.
Yeah, and then you get rid of. You get rid of Damian Jones and
Gosh, yeah, you probably could. Why not?
and
Yeah, they could make that work, I think. The problem is they would have to give up some of their stuff, like a pick or two. One of those picks. The thing
yeah,
with the Lakers is I really think their best move is that Indiana package. Like if it comes to getting
uh-huh.
something to be competitive this season, I like the fit of Rashawn Holmes on their team. It's just you could get more value in return for
Yeah,
somebody like Westbrook going to the Pacers and getting Buddy Hield and what's his name, Miles Turner back in return.
yeah,
Because Miles Turner is like we could have a very similar discussion about Miles Turner.
yeah,
I thought Rashawn Holmes is more interesting to talk about than Miles Turner. Everybody always talks about Miles Turner getting traded.
yeah. Let's see here. Sean
All right, yeah, go ahead.
Sean wants John Collins.
He was
Oh,
on my list of trade potential people to bring up and talk about. I still think he's going to get dealt from Atlanta.
he said to the Wizards.
Rui, Kuzma, and Kispert.
So John Collins
Kinda.
for Kuzma.
I
Where's
kind of like that trade, Sean. I kind of like that.
Whoops, didn't mean to click on Kispert. Kispert and Hachimura.
I'm trying to think of John Collins, Rui, Kuzma, and Kispert. Who says no? For what reason? I feel
So
like that's kind of a win for both teams.
let's see here. So the Wizards would be at a +1, and the Hawks would be at a -2 by
But the
adding those two.
trade works,
The
right?
trade
Though.
works.
Dang man, I kind of like that trade. If I'm Atlanta, I would probably want to pick
Let's
too. I'd probably want to pick on top of that because John Collins is better than those three guys for sure. Like
yeah.
he's definitely better than those three guys. I like the idea of getting Kispert though to replace Herter, just as like a 3-point shooting white guy off the
Yeah, I was
bench.
gonna say the 3-point white guy. Dude, that's what you're
Yeah,
looking
why
for.
not? You need some 3-point shooting white guys off the bench. Can't ever hurt. All right, let's move on to the next one.
All right, what's your next one?
I know that you know
That I
the
know that
one
you
that
know.
I created the segment for the person.
Uh
Okay,
oh.
Bernie. I know you know the person that I'm referring to. So we're gonna save him for last.
Okay.
Okay. And we're gonna skip the tier that I would say he's in, and we're gonna move to the next tier, which is like superstars, potential superstars who could be traded this season. Right?
Okay.
My first gut instinct when I was putting this together and writing stuff down, I really feel like Bradley Beal is still gonna get moved. I
Bradley
really do.
Beal. Okay. Well, he
I,
can't get
I'm not
moved.
sure it's in the middle. Not yeah. It would have to be in January, right?
Yeah, sometime then, or
Like right
before.
at the deadline.
Yeah, right at the deadline, I think.
He's somebody I just think Washington's going to be so bad. Like, I'm sorry, Sean. I'm sorry. I just think Washington is not good. Um, I was really unimpressed with a lot of what they did, and just I think any team where Porzingis and Bradley Beal are your top two guys, I don't see that leading to anything more than like 40 wins max. That's almost a good season for that roster. So I think there's a universe in which Bradley Beal gets traded. The question is what team does it make sense? What team would want to take on that contract? And the discussion is do they have players that make sense for the value, but also
Mm-hmm.
something that needs to be considered for all these teams is how much contracts are going to go up in 2 or 3 seasons.
Yep.
So if you have a guy that might need an extension 2 years from now, you could lock in a guy like Beal for a fraction of what that contract might be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like you could get Beal's better contract now or suffer for a year or two and then be in a good spot for a few years. When I was thinking about Beal, I went back to the obvious one, which is, again, your Boston Celtics, Bernie. And that makes sense based on the criteria I just laid out because you do have the Jalen Brown extensions coming up. So you could argue that it makes sense, but I wouldn't do it if I'm Boston. So I wouldn't even want to go through with the realistic trade simulator because I don't think the trade makes sense for Boston to do it. I don't think that makes you better. Do you think that makes Boston better? Let's say it's Jalen Brown. I don't know how much you'd even have to give up past Jalen Brown. Let's say it's Jalen Brown, a first round, and a pick swap. Just to throw it out there, right? I know that wouldn't work. Would you want to do that trade, Bernie?
No, I don't want to be anywhere near Bradley Beal. Not at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I can't disagree with you. That brings me to the next team. A team that missed out in the Donovan Mitchell sweepstakes, Bernie.
The Knicks.
No, Miami.
All right, Miami.
What do you think about Miami going after Bradley Beal? Their contract situation is a nightmare. They have so much money, but they have ways to get the deal done. It's as simple as you. I think you just put Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson together, and I think the money is close.
Yeah. I mean, you could do potentially Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson. I think they would want Tyler Hero, so you have to get rid of him as well.
Sure, I
Bradley
would give
Beal.
him up too. Why you wouldn't even need Tyler Hero at that point? That's just redundant, to have him in Bradley Beal. So, what do you think about that, Bernie? What does that mean for both of these teams? Do you think there's a universe in which these teams are interested in something like this?
I feel like if you bring those guys, the Wizards are still stuck in the same conundrum that they will be even now, which is so guard heavy or forward heavy that I just don't think that it
Sure.
makes sense for this team. I think this team, when you look at the Wizards, they need to cut some of the fat that they have on the team. I feel like they're so loaded at these positions where guys are going to be playing the same spot. Guys like Danny Avesia, guys like Johnny Davis, Corey Kispert, Bradley Beal, who you just re-signed, Kyle Kuzma, Will Barton, who's going to be on the team as well. And Bradley Beal, I think I already said, like you have so many of those guys. Rui Hachimura, same position, power forward
Mm-hmm.
to small forward type of build. I feel like they need to do a better job of getting some of those guys out of there, and bringing in. Either they need to get rid of Bradley Beal and just kind of commit to this youth project that they have going on here, or
Mm-hmm.
they need to get rid of some of the guys that they have in here to make a team that's even viable. And if I'm them, I'm not looking for another guard or forward. I'm looking for, maybe some centers or maybe even some draft picks so I can get my team better. I think the Wizards
Sure,
can.
but then you
Uh,
go ahead. You go ahead.
the only thing is, like, I think the Wizards are in this conundrum of they have so many players that play the same positions that it's hard to know who they're trying to build around or who they want their person to be.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm getting at with this trade in general. Like they're not going to trade Bradley Beal if things are going okay. They're not going to do that. I don't see a world in which it is going okay. And I'm sorry for you Wizards fans out there. When I look at the Wizards roster, I see a lot of bleak stuff. It doesn't scream a team that's going to get a lot better with time. Do you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
they don't have necessarily anybody in the youth movement aspect of their squad that has even really shown enough promise to justify
Mm-hmm.
focusing on. I'm not trying to throw shots at guys like Rui Hachimura and Kispert. Like those dudes are fine. It's just they're not stars. They've shown no potential to be stars in the league. So when it comes down to it, the reason why I would propose something like this is more of the blow it up type situation where Washington looks at what they have and they say, gosh, man, none of this really amounts to anything long term. So why are we going to pay this guy 43, almost $50 million in a few years when we could go get assets and just like follow the lead of some of these other places where, like Utah's doing, you take one asset, turn it into five, and then you take two of those five and turn those into five more, right? It screams a team that has the potential to do something like that because they have a lot of stuff on the team that's worth something. It's just not worth a lot.
Yeah.
So if you could say go get a package of like, let's say it's basically the Donovan Mitchell trade package, right? Let's say Miami was going to do 3 picks, Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry, and what's his name, Duncan Robinson, right? You could go turn Tyler Hero into a few more first round picks, maybe not a few, but a couple. And then you could probably go turn Kyle Lowry into a first round pick too if you really wanted to get frisky with it. So it's one of those things where I think this is a situation that's going to look worse and worse by the day. I'm sorry again, Wizards fans. I just don't really see a universe in which Bradley Beal is on this team like 2 years from now. I don't envision it happening.
I don't see him on the team past a year, to be honest with you. Because again, I think for them, they need to start looking at and we'll talk about it when we do our preseason predictions and all that stuff
Yeah.
and get really more in depth on these teams. But I think just kind of synopsis overview of the Wizards right now, they have a lot of young players that are in the same timeline that they need to figure out who they're going to move with and which guys they're going to try to move on from so they can start figuring out, okay, especially because, guys like Rui Hachimura, this is a prove it year for him.
Yeah.
Had a lot of injuries, had some mental health stuff that he needed to take care of. I'm happy that he's taking care of that now. But this is a prove it year for him. He's going to need to figure out how he's going to play well. He hasn't played the same since he left Gonzaga. And he needs to find a way to play like Rui Hachimura from Gonzaga because that's what teams are looking for. That's why they drafted him. And so they need to start looking at guys like him, guys like Corey Kispert, guys like Johnny Davis, guys like who else do they have that's kind of in the young mold right now?
Yeah, did you say Johnny Davis?
Johnny
I think you
Davis,
did actually.
Aveja,
Yeah.
Hachimura, Kuzma. Like they need to start looking at these guys and figuring out, okay, is this someone I'm building around, or is this someone I'm moving on from? Because I think that's where the Wizards right now have to look at their team and their roster and figure out, okay, these players are what's going to get us to that next level. This player is not going to get us to where we need to go, and so they need to figure it out from here on out.
Yeah, and I guess the last question I would have before we move on to our last player is realistically, how many teams do you think are even interested in Beal on that contract? I think there's certainly some, which is why he's still a valuable asset. He's still a great player. He was the NBA's leading scorer 2 seasons ago. So there's definitely people interested who would be interested theoretically. It's more, I think when you really stop and look at what these teams would even have to put on the table for a guy like Beal, the teams that have the most don't want a guy like Beal because he doesn't change your scenario. So it's going to be one of these teams that's always star hunting. Those are the options when you are realistic about it. So Miami is one of the teams I was thinking of. I considered even somewhere like Denver, maybe, with Jamal Murray's injury history, not really playing very much recently. I think that might be something to consider too. But yeah, I would put them in like code red, blow it up potential within the next calendar year. I would definitely keep an eye on Washington.
Okay.
Let's move on, Bertie. Last player.
Yeah, last one.
This is the one, the big one for me. This is the one I legitimately think this is going to happen. Okay. Maybe not to the team that I'm going to propose that he goes to. I think he's going to go. And this is a player Bernie and I have been contentious about in recent history of whether or not he's actually going to get traded. And that's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, SGA himself from the Oklahoma City Thunder. I truly do not think SGA will be an Oklahoma City Thunder player at the end of this season.
Okay.
I just don't see it. He's 24. He's certainly on the cusp of like an all-star bid if he was on a winning team. He's very, very good. He had 2 of the most memorable game-winning shots except one of them wasn't a game-winning shot last season, back-to-back games. This is a dude. If I had to make a list of players that nobody talks about that is just better than most of the dudes you hear about, he would be almost at the top of my list. He's one of my favorite players to watch in the NBA when he's healthy. And I think, the last thing I'll say before I let you go on this, Bernie, and hear your opinion on whether you think he'd be traded. When you're this good, you don't want to tank every year, I'll drop my famous little word. Bernie loves to use it, the timeline. Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's timeline is outpacing the Oklahoma City Thunder's timeline. It's just not on the same schedule anymore. Last season, it was. And I would argue if Chet Holmgren was still healthy, you could argue in the direction that let's see how it goes. It could be on the timeline with these guys. But he basically had to sit on the bench a bunch last season with an injury he probably could have played through. And something similar happened the season before with him on this team in terms of this guy wins you games and they want to be terrible. And I don't think he wants to be on a team that doesn't win 30 games again. Bernie, the floor is yours.
I don't think he's getting traded. I know you made your arguments, you made your points, but I think that he fits the timeline for what they're looking for. Again, he's only 22, 23, I think.
He's going to be 24 soon.
Yeah, he's going to be 24. So he fits the timeline of guys like Giddey, guys like Holmgren, even though he's going to be hurt for this year. He's still fitting the timeline of where they're at realistically of, again, the guy that is the older veteran player once these other guys have kind of grown up and matured a little bit more as players. He's going to be there for them. And I just think that, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander being the head of the team, I don't realistically see a team that could potentially try to go in for just Shai Gilgeous-Alexander unless they come in with a package that is so ridiculous and something that they can guarantee one of these young players that, in the future could be traded for, whether that's a current superstar or whether that's a player in the draft, like a Victor Wembanyama or, whoever is like the can't miss prospect that year. That's the only thing there's the only chance I see the Thunder even realistically trying to get rid of Shai Gilgeous. I just think that they gave him the extension. They love what he is for the community of the Oklahoma City Thunder. And that's why I don't think you can necessarily trade him away from this team when I think that he is one of those guys that the team respects as kind of like going to be the leader relatively soon because he's going to enter that age in those prime years of being the guy. So
sure. And he's done everything that's been asked of him to an extent that I don't think many people have given him enough credit for, Like I think if you're as good as he is and you're in the NBA and you have this competitive desire to win, I think it's a lot to even be asked for one season to just say, hey, like, we don't want you to play as much as you can play because you're too good, right? That's a tough ask for anybody. So I think one thing that like you're saying is the team might be not willing to shop him, right? But the question is, like, how long is he going to be happy in that scenario, Bernie? And I would say, like, somebody like DeJounte Murray, I think, is a great comparison. Because for everything public-facing that we saw with the DeJounte Murray era, I just combined Murray and era into Murrah. The DeJounte Murray trade era in San Antonio, and I've given this conspiracy theory on this channel before. Like, I honestly think it was a mutual, hey, DeJounte Murray just doesn't want to be on a bad team anymore. He's done everything you guys have asked for him. He's a great player, borderline all-star. He wants a trade, but he doesn't want to make it public and throw you guys under the bus, So just make a move, go get value for him, and everybody's happy, right? Mm-hmm. I honestly see a very similar scenario in place. Like, this team is bad, Bernie. They're going to be bad this year. If they had Chet, the question mark is enough that you would say maybe they're not terrible, but they're not good without Chet. They're not good. Right. As good as Giddey is, as much as I like Giddey and Shai, this team isn't in the West, they're not a play-in team. So I think there's a lot of question marks in terms of, is he going to be happy? Whether or not it's one of those things where he's going to go out there and raise a fuss, I think he's entirely gettable, though. I think he's entirely gettable. Like, in terms of the value you'd have to give in return, right? Because let's use DeJounte Murray's trade as a very similar comparison. Just a year or two older than him, has more accolades, been doing it at a higher level for a little bit longer than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has.
Mm-hmm.
And he was worth 3 first-round picks, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, with a little bit around it.
Yeah.
I think there's 15 teams in the league that would give that much for Shai. But you then have to take into consideration what certain teams were considering giving for a guy like Donovan Mitchell, who only averages a few more points than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and is significantly worse as a defender than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And you'd have to say, let's get to the New York Knicks. I see you already have it pulled up.
Yep, it's on
A
there.
team like the Knicks, which the reason I keep I'm sure I've annoyed the hell out of you with this Shai Gilgeous-Alexander trade discussion, but this is the guy. Like this is a guy that every team should be looking at in terms of you're willing to consider giving up 7 first-round picks for a guy who lost in the first round of the playoffs with other All-NBA players on his team in Donovan Mitchell, right? Here's a guy who's never been given a fair shake with a team that's above bottom 7 in the league and still consistently is solid, better defender, doesn't complain, doesn't ask for much, just does his thing, and he can do anything in terms of shooting on the court. There's no universe in which a team wouldn't, I think a smart team wouldn't say, hey, we need another guard. Here's a guy who's like 6'5", 6'6". We can give up 4 firsts in like a contract to get him, right? OKC already has so many draft assets. I just don't see them trading SGA. I mean, I get it, but here's my dilemma with OKC, and this is literally the reason. I think in certain scenarios, I would agree with both of you. You've done this much for this long, and if you didn't have the hiccup that is Chet Holmgren's injury, why would you consider trading Shai? Yeah. And the answer is you wouldn't consider trading him. The difference is that this guy that they just spent their second-round pick on has a Liz Frank injury in his foot, which has been career-ending for certain centers of similar size to Chet Holmgren. There's forward centers, right? And he's a full year out. He's a full year out. Players like Shai don't want to be on the worst team in the league. We don't live in the era of people just being okay for hometown teams just because everybody likes each other. That's not the era we're in anymore. It's just not. So I don't know, man. I hate to keep going off on this guy. I think there's a lot of teams that should be picking up the phone and should be trying to make the deal if it's there. And it's less about getting assets in return for the long term. But I would say, what else does OKC do? What do they do besides that?
They continue to stick to their timeline, Pete. And that timeline is try to be as bad as you can so you can get the players that you want. Because here's the thing that we know about the Oklahoma City Thunder. They are literally going to be in the draft lottery for the next, what seems like 5 to 6 years with how many draft picks they've acquired since Sam Presti came in and was like, I'm going to NBA 2K the heck out of this and get this pick, that pick, and every pick in between. And that is kind of where I'm at with this whole situation. Again, I think Shai Gilgeous could or couldn't fit the timeline depending on how you want to look at things. But I think at the end of the day, when I look at what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish, I think he's going to be the head of the team. Like, again, Josh Giddey is listed as a shooting guard here. I think it's the flip opposite. I think Giddey's the point guard and Shai Gilgeous is the shooting guard in this team. And you look at a guy like, Poku, who a lot of people have been high on.
No, he's terrible.
I mean, not terrible, but he's a guy that, he's a favorite of some people. Chet Holmgren, I think, is going to be an excellent ball defender. I think that he, has the ability to do something special. Unfortunately, he just got hurt and, can't contribute this year. I love the pick that they got of Jaden Williams. I think that he's going to be a great addition to that roster. And I think they're going to try to go at it with this team. Again, do I think that this team is going to be necessarily a playoff team in the next couple of years? Probably not, because I still think they're missing that kind of small forward score, even though they signed Lou Dort to an extension as well. And I think that as soon as they find that in whatever players coming up in the coming drafts, I think they're going to be just fine, Pete. And I just think that because they're going to be just fine, that leads me to believe that they're not looking to trade away Shai Gilgeous. As much as you would love him on the Knicks, as much as you would love him to be on a different team, I think that the Oklahoma City Thunder are going to be good enough to where he's going to want to stay on that team and try to contend with whatever they have on that roster.
I mean, and honestly, I do. I hope you're right. Like, I hope you're right in the sense that I think that we need more players like that, are just happy being on the squad they're on, want to make a difference and turn the team around for the long term, right? But I do think, I think you guys are sticking on the OKC side of things more than him, right? As a person, right? And I agree with you. In terms of OKC, I don't think they should trade him, even though I think he's a point guard and I think Josh Giddey is a point guard in a
Yeah.
perfect scenario. I still like them together, but I think they're both point guards. The question is how long can you justify this guy's career just being on this team? Like, that's where it comes down to for me. Like, the selfish part of me is like, God, I would love to see him on the Knicks. He's the perfect fit for everything the Knicks need. But beyond even just that, he's too good to be on a bottom 5 team every year of his career. And if you look back at his career, he's been on almost bottom 5 teams almost every season of his career. And it's not really his fault. He was a trade piece in the Paul George trade from the Clippers before they started to turn it around. He was on that last season where they made the playoffs with Lou Williams and him and Montrez, right? But besides that, it's been nothing but just bleak gray skies for this dude. And I question whether or not he's going to be okay with it. I agree with you too. I really think OKC is not going to want to move him if it's up to them exclusively. Why would they? He is only 24, right? The difference is he's not going to just give up the rest of his career for that. I don't think he is. So I don't know. This is one of the most interesting ones. It's why I saved it for last. I think it's a good debate, a good discussion.
Yeah.
And I think it really depends on your philosophy as a team. Like, I don't even think that OKC necessarily needs to just say, hey, we're getting assets in return, long-term assets. They could go get something better than assets. They could go get something that fits their team more. And he fits their team pretty well, but what is their team right now anyway? So they're in the most gray area of all teams by their own making of we're the asset squad, but we do want to get better. But now we're still not good enough to get better. So we're kind of still by default the asset team.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the interesting situation for them as they continue to develop and continue to have those draft picks that they have. We'll see, what team, what players they like a little bit better than Shai Gilgeous. If they do, I think that they should keep him and kind of hold ship with him. But, let us know in the comment section down below, people. What do you guys make of this trade situation for the Oklahoma City Thunder? Should they look to move on from Shai Gilgeous, or should they try to hold on to him and try to build around this roster? We would love to know your comments and opinions in the comment section down below. And please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Again, all that stuff leads to more interaction and helps us lead us to better conversations that you guys are more involved in, like Sean and Tar Heel Nation were today. So again, let us know in the comment section down below.